time for another book versus adaptation where I watch the adaptation, then read the book and decide which is better based on the plot, characters, and relationships so that you know which is worth your time. Today, let's talk about Lockwood Co, The Screaming Staircase. There will be spoilers in this video for the first book and the first 3 episodes of the Netflix series. If you don't want to be spoiled, you can actually use the chapters below to find out which I liked better. One major change that I thought was interesting in the show was that they decided to make Lucy new to Lockwood Co. As opposed to in the book, I think she had been with the team for about 6 months. This was a good narrative choice for the show because it allows Lucy to act as the viewers as an introduction into this world. I struggled a bit in the book when I realized that they were relying on 8-year-olds to keep adults safe, as opposed to the 13-year-olds that are allowed to be recruited as agents in the show. Now, that's still rough, but it's at least a little bit better. But I definitely think there's a really interesting conversation to have here about a universe that relies on children to keep the adults safe. I also liked that they flipped the dialogue between Lucy and Lockwood in that first scene, especially after we see what happens with Jacobs and Co, and to show that she's incredibly mistrustful of adults, and it makes her decision to join Lockwood Co in the first place make more sense. I also think it's interesting that the show added the idea of pervasive ghost lock. That didn't seem to be a thing in the first book. Maybe it is in later books, but it's not a thing in the first book. Ghost lock in the books comes off a lot more like what happens to Lucy in the climax of the show, where it's not permanent. I'm curious how that will play out in future seasons of the show if we get another season, but I didn't necessarily feel like it was needed in this. The show also just made some changes to the overall plot that I thought made a bit more logical sense. For example, making Lucy have a psychic connection with Annabelle's ghost really plays up this idea of her powers, which is something we don't really get in the book. In the book, it comes off as very impulsive of, oh, this locket, it's shiny and pretty, I'm gonna take it. I also just didn't find it believable that Fairfax would just show up at Portland Road to hire these kids to exorcise his house. So for background on that, I'm actually an executive assistant. So I'm essentially like Ellie in the show, except that I don't get to drive a fancy car like she does. But people that are of as high standing as Fairfax is don't just leave their day to drive across town to a bunch of kids' houses. No, they do exactly what they do in the show, which is set up an appointment, have the other people come to them so that once that meeting is over, they can go back to things that are more important. I also wasn't crazy in the book that Lockwood was the one that made the suggestion to Lucy to wear the locket to Coomberry Hall. It just felt contrived, whereas I felt like it came off much more as a character choice in the show to have Lucy continuously pursuing this ring locket. The fact that it was a surprise that Lucy did this in the climax of the show was actually better storytelling. However, the investigation of Coomberry Hall plays out much better in the book than it does in the show. People who have read the books more than just once can correct me on this, but I don't remember the monks in the show being satanic monks. I know that they were executed for being thought to be heretics. I thought that's what it was, which is actually more realistic and in some ways scarier than, oh, we have these satanic monks and that's where everything started to go wrong. Because, you know, at the end of the day, I think this series might be telling us something similar to what a lot of kind of post-apocalyptic series tell you, especially like in the zombie ghost genre, is that the zombies and ghosts aren't actually what you need to be afraid of, it's the other people. The other thing I was kind of confused about in the climax in the book is that I didn't think that Lucy was ghost locked in the book like she was in the show. And there was just a very like sudden mental shift of I'm going to jump down this well and that's going to be a better ending. And maybe that's what was going through the character's head when she was ghost locked in the show, but I feel like there's a weird distinction there. Now, granted, if I were surrounded by a bunch of satanic ghosts that would, you know, ghost touch me and I would die a horrible death, I might choose to jump down a well instead. But it just seemed like a very sudden and out of character shift for Lucy's character in the book. Now, I fully admit that I may be reading this scene wrong, so feel free to correct me in the comments. The motive for Annabelle Ward's murder is also better in the show, and the reason for this is because the book gets pretty victim-blamey, and I'm not about that. And lastly, the skull reveal at the end of the book is a lot more comedic in the book, which I have a feeling the skull in general is a lot more comedic than it is in the show. But at the same time, you lose some of that dramatic aspect, and it just made kind of sense given what we learn about later, since I'm just focusing on the first book and the first 3 episodes, I can't really talk about here. But given on some of the things we learned later, it made sense that she would be like physically affected by this ghost reaching out to her instead of in the book where she's just like, yeah, whatever, man, okay. Overall, I really enjoyed the plot in both the book and the show, but I feel like the show fixed some of the gaps in logic that I had while reading the book. As an executive assistant, I feel obligated to talk about Ellie, even though she's barely in the book or the show. I really enjoyed that they decided to change Fairfax's assistant from a man into a woman and just made her completely kick-ass, especially since the team just assumed that it was a guy that broke into Lockwood's house. It was a fun misdirect, almost like it was saying, "Surprise, motherfucker!" Fairfax is a character that comes off as your quintessential middle grade young YA villain. He borders on mustache twirling. I feel like the show humanized him a bit more. I really liked it when Lockwood Co showed up in his office and that whole negotiating the contract scene. I thought it was really cool, and the character of Fairfax really came off in that scene like he respected Lockwood and is like, you kid, you're going places. I like that.
We are the only agency who can do this job the way you need it doing. Nice pitch.
It felt more realistic and showed that while he's still a bad guy who did a really bad thing, that he was also a real person as opposed to the characterization we got in the book. Kipps is really only in one scene in the first episodes and really only in one scene in the books, but it's everybody's favorite library scene.
Her name's Lucy. My name's Lockwood. And you need a ladder. No, I don't. Yes, you do.
I cringed so hard when Kipps called Lucy sweetheart and said that she was Lockwood's assistant, which is a direct call out to the book where Lucy actually is hired as Lockwood's assistant. I don't know if you can hear the ice cream truck, but it's there. So while I was waiting for the ice cream truck to pass, this happened. I'm just gonna go with it. I don't really want to go into why this change is so important right now because I'll talk about it later, but it's important. However, since the character of Kipps himself is not really different between the book and the show, I'm going to give the point to the book. I have kind of mixed feelings about Barnes. I really liked that they decided to use this as an opportunity to add diversity by making him Black in the show. However, I didn't necessarily like how antagonistic he was towards Lockwood Co. In the book, he comes off more as like a begrudging ally of like, okay, well, you know, you guys are following the rules, sort of, as opposed to like actively being out to get them. Now, this does add some nice drama to the show, and I think they have it in there so that in future seasons there can be some nice character growth with Barnes. At the end of the day, diversity matters, so I'm giving the point to the adaptation. George Kareem is a dry, sarcastic, incredibly smart person who is very caring once he opens up to people. George Cubbins just never got there for me. Aside from the fat nerd stereotype that he plays in the book, he just never had that moment of connection with the other characters that made him a bit more likable, like George Kareem does in the show. So George was an easy win for the adaptation for me. Lucy is pretty great in both the book and the TV show. And Ruby Stokes does an amazing job portraying this character. I do feel like Lucy in the TV show is a little bit softer than she is in the book as a character. Not in a bad way, just in that she's a little bit more gentle than Lucy in the book. I wish I had a lot more to say about Lucy other than just I really like her, but I don't. Since I feel like the characterization is pretty similar between the book and the adaptation, I'm gonna give the point to the book. Lockwood is probably where I see the biggest difference in characterization between the book and the adaptation. While they never actually say it in the book, Lockwood is definitely a fellow neurospicy friend. He's impulsive, easily distracted, tunes people out, and he has some problems with emotional regulation. These are all things that I struggle with my ADHD. He's also brilliant and innovative, but I didn't necessarily like how he treated other characters in the book, which I'll get into more in the relationships section. In contrast, we get Show Lockwood, who I have to give major props to Cameron Chapman. I'm really looking forward to seeing where his career goes. Like Lucy in the show, they soften Lockwood's character a bit, and I think this may be a result of aging up the characters. The characters just have a bit more emotional maturity in the show than they do in the first book. Lockwood in the show is a character that is incredibly self-aware while also simultaneously being pretty egotistical.
Those newspaper clippings on the wall.
Oh, you saw those? Not very modest, is it?
And that self-awareness was what was missing from the book for me. It makes him a bit less of an ass. This may change in future books, but I'm just looking at the first book right now. I kind of love the rivalry between Kipps and Lockwood. I imagine there is probably some really good fan fiction out there about these two. Their relationship between the book and the adaptation is pretty much exactly the same, so I'm giving the point to the book. In the book, Lucy and George barely tolerate each other, and it's just Lockwood that is the glue between them. I love how the show strengthens their relationship with the pizza scene. The relationship between George and Lockwood isn't really elaborated on much in the book. A lot of this may be due to the book being written in Lucy's first-person perspective, but they always just came off as primarily just boss and colleague. I really like how in the show we get to see them working together as Lockwood Co. And that even though it's Lockwood's name on the door, he still obviously values and listens to George's opinion, even if he decides not to take it, which he never does. Let me just say, this show understands how to do a slow burn, and it makes my demisexual soul happy. Lucy and Lockwood in the show have the perfect amount of push and pull. Lockwood shows that he values Lucy's opinion and treats her as an equal. This equal footing is what was missing from the book for me. That's why I think it was such an important update to change Lucy from being his assistant to being his colleague.
This must be your new assistant.
Colleague.
I have a lot more to say about these two, but I'm trying to just keep it to the first 3 episodes. Lockwood Co. is one of the purest found family tropes I've ever seen in television. I love how they collaborate and make decisions together. I found it incredibly jarring in the book that Lockwood would just make these unilateral decisions for the team. And while Lucy and George do give him a hard time about that in the book, it's quite different from the show where Lockwood makes a unilateral decision by going and talking to the press and mentioning Lucy when Lucy specifically told him not to.
I mean it. Keep me out the spotlight.
And Lucy and George call him out on that.
I told you to leave me out of it.
Big move, Lockwood.
And he actually listens and absorbs it. And after that point, he's pretty much making decisions with them and not for them.
But we're a team, so if either of you have another option on how to keep this agency afloat, then I'm all ears.
Okay. So I know that the adaptation won this battle, but I still want to say that I love this book. I feel like if the rest of the series is at least this good, if not better, it's probably going to become my new Harry Potter because I don't read Harry Potter anymore. I feel like the adaptation made smart changes to update the story to modern sensibilities. And the show added a bit more realism instead of relying on some of these middle grade tropes like the book does. I highly encourage you to give both the book and the adaptation a try. Going along with that, I need a second season of this show. I have decided that if the show gets renewed, I'm going to do a giveaway on my channel. So make sure you're subscribed so you can see that announcement, and stay tuned for Lockwood & Co. The Whispering Skull. Hey, no thank you, sir. No thank you, sir. Is... Really? What are you doing? What are you doing? This is Ali, by the way. What are you doing? I don't know if you can hear the ice cream truck, but it's there. Somebody must be buying ice cream. I kind of want ice cream. This song is never gonna get out of my head. So while I was waiting for the ice cream truck to pass, this happened. I'm just gonna go with it. Hey, buddy. No, thank you. I love you. No. He's clawing my leg. You are trouble. If you liked this video, check out my last book versus adaptation. Let's see what stories tomorrow brings.